Have you ever wanted to disappear? To become invisible while you plan the perfect payback against someone who destroyed your life? We've all felt that burning desire to be the fly on the wall, to get close enough to our enemies that we could destroy them from within, would you? But what if your job already made you invisible? What if you were so trusted, so essential, so overlooked that you could literally weave death into the fabric of your oppressor's daily life? Now imagine you possessed a skill so valuable that your masters depended on you completely, never suspecting that the very clothes protecting their bodies could become instruments of their destruction. Imagine having access to their most intimate spaces, their bedrooms, their children's nurseries, their dinner parties, all while they treated you like a piece of furniture, never imagining the brilliant mind plotting their demise with needle and thread. In 1844, an enslaved man named Isaac in Mississippi turned his master's complete dependence on his tailoring skills into the most sophisticated assassination plot in American slavery history. Using nothing but fabric, thread, and his encyclopedic knowledge of deadly plants, he slowly poisoned an entire plantation family through their own clothes. But here's what will chill you to your soul. They never suspected him until their own skin began to rot off their bodies. Welcome back to Buried Truths, where we uncover the stories they buried and give voice to those they silenced. I'm about to take you into the twisted mind of a genius who turned fashion into warfare, who transformed every stitch into an act of rebellion, and who proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't always the most obvious one. This isn't just about revenge. This is about how intelligence, patience, and access can be deadlier than any gun. So ask yourself right now, who in your life has invisible access to you? Who handles your food, your clothes, your personal items while you barely notice they exist? Keep that thought in your mind, because by the end of Isaac's story, you'll never look at the people around you the same way again. The year 1844 found the Mississippi Delta drowning in cotton and human misery. But one enslaved man was about to prove that expertise could be more dangerous than any rebellion. On the sprawling Whitmore plantation, 30 miles south of Vicksburg, a revolution was being stitched together one thread at a time, and nobody suspected that their most trusted servant was weaving their destruction with his own hands. Isaac wasn't just any enslaved man. He was a master craftsman whose skills with needle and thread were legendary throughout the region. Born in Charleston to a seamstress who taught him the secrets of fabric and fashion, Isaac possessed an almost supernatural ability to create clothing that fit perfectly, lasted forever, and made the wearer look like royalty. But more importantly, he possessed something his masters never suspected, an extensive knowledge of plants, dyes, and the deadly secrets hidden in Mississippi's forests. The Whitmore family, Colonel James Whitmore, his wife Margaret, their 3 children, and Margaret's elderly mother, lived in the kind of luxury that only blood money could buy. Their mansion was filled with the finest furniture. Their table groaned under elaborate meals, and their wardrobes overflowed with Isaac's exquisite creations. They trusted him completely, gave him access to every room in the house, and treated his work as essential to maintaining their social status in Mississippi high society. What they didn't know was that Isaac remembered everything. He remembered being sold away from his mother when he was 12. He remembered watching his sister being dragged screaming to the overseer's cabin. He remembered the whipping that left permanent scars across his back because he had dared to ask for news of his family. Most importantly, he remembered Colonel Whitmore's words on the day he bought him. "You're nothing but property now, boy." Expensive property, but property all the same. For 8 years, Isaac had smiled, bowed, and created beautiful clothes while his hatred grew like cancer in his chest. But unlike other enslaved people who let their rage explode in violence, Isaac's fury transformed into something far more dangerous: cold, methodical, scientific precision. He began to study the plants growing wild around the plantation, learning which ones could kill, which ones could cause pain, and most importantly, which ones could be processed into substances that would absorb into fabric and transfer to human skin. The forest around the Whitmore plantation was a natural pharmacy of death. Isaac discovered that the sap from certain poison ivy variants could be concentrated and woven into fabric fibers. He learned that the oil from poison oak, when properly extracted and treated, could maintain its potency for months while remaining odorless. Most cunningly of all, he found that the root of the local water hemlock could be processed into a powder so fine it could be incorporated into thread itself. But Isaac's masterstroke wasn't just his knowledge of poisons, it was his understanding of human psychology. The Whitmore family was so accustomed to his presence, so dependent on his skills, so convinced of his loyalty, that they never questioned why he needed access to different rooms, why he collected certain plants for dyes, or why he sometimes worked late into the night. To them, he was simply Isaac the tailor, as much a part of the house as the furniture. His plan began in the spring of 1844, when Margaret Whitmore commissioned an entirely new wardrobe for the family's upcoming social season. She wanted everything: day dresses, evening gowns, men's suits, children's clothes, even undergarments and night clothes. It was the perfect opportunity, and Isaac accepted the commission with the kind of eager professionalism that made the family congratulate themselves on owning such a talented slave. What the Whitmores didn't realize was that Isaac had spent months preparing for this moment. In a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of his quarters, he had accumulated an arsenal of processed plant toxins, each one carefully extracted, refined, and tested on fabric scraps. He had experimented with different application methods, studying how the poisons would react to washing, to heat, to prolonged contact with human skin. The first garments Isaac delivered were Margaret's new undergarments, corsets, chemises, and stockings that would have direct, prolonged contact with her skin. Using techniques he had perfected over months of secret experimentation, he wove poison oak extract into the very fibers of the fabric, then treated the finished garments with a solution derived from stinging nettle and concentrated poison ivy. The toxins were invisible, odorless, and designed to activate gradually through body heat and perspiration. Margaret was delighted with the fit and comfort of her new undergarments, praising Isaac's skill to her friends and wearing the poisoned clothes daily. Within a week, she began experiencing what she initially dismissed as a minor skin irritation. By the second week, angry red welts had appeared across her torso. By the third week, the welts had become infected, weeping sores that no amount of powder or ointment could heal. But this was just the beginning of Isaac's masterpiece. As Margaret's condition worsened, he delivered Colonel Whitmore's new shirts, fine cotton garments treated with a different cocktail of plant toxins that would cause a slower but more systematic poisoning. The Colonel's symptoms began as a persistent rash around his collar and cuffs, areas where the treated fabric had the most contact with his skin. The Whitmore children received their new clothes next, play clothes and school outfits that Isaac had treated with a gentler, but no less insidious mixture of irritants. He had calculated the doses carefully, wanting to cause suffering without immediately arousing suspicion. The children began complaining of itchy, burning skin, developing rashes that seemed to migrate across their bodies in patterns that mimicked the cut and style of their clothing. Here's where Isaac's plan revealed its true diabolic genius. Each family member was poisoned with different plant combinations that caused different symptoms, making it impossible for the local doctor to identify as the common cause. Margaret's weeping sores suggested one type of illness, the Colonel's systematic rash pointed to another, and the children's migratory irritation seemed like yet another condition, entirely. As the weeks passed and the family's suffering intensified, Isaac continued to deliver new garments while playing the role of the concerned, loyal servant. When Margaret collapsed during a dinner party, her skin literally rotting beneath her beautiful dress, Isaac was the first to rush to her aid. When the Colonel's neck became so swollen he could barely breathe, Isaac suggested calling for the best doctors in Vicksburg. When the children cried through the night as their skin burned and blistered, Isaac offered to sit up with them, applying cold compresses with the same hands that had woven their torment. The local physician, Dr. Edmund Thornfield, was baffled by the family's condition. Each member displayed different symptoms that seemed to follow no known pattern of disease. He prescribed various treatments, mercury rubs, bloodletting, even cold baths, but nothing provided relief. In fact, the family's condition continued to deteriorate at an alarming rate. But Isaac wasn't finished. His masterpiece was the formal evening where he created for the family's planned appearance at the governor's ball in Jackson, the social event of the season where the Whitmores intended to display their wealth and status. These garments represented months of preparation, incorporating every deadly plant extract Isaac had perfected, woven into fabric so beautiful that the family eagerly anticipated wearing them despite their ongoing health problems. The evening gowns for Margaret and her mother were works of art, silk and satin creations adorned with intricate beadwork and embroidery. But hidden within the gorgeous fabric was Isaac's most potent creation, a combination of concentrated poison sumac, processed stinging nettle, and an extract from the deadly nightshade plant that grew wild in the plantations back 40. These gowns weren't just clothing. They were wearable torture devices designed to cause maximum suffering at the peak of the family's social triumph. The Colonel's formal suit was equally magnificent and equally deadly. Deadly. Isaac had treated the wool with extracts that would cause severe respiratory distress when heated by body warmth, while the silk lining was infused with contact poisons that would cause systemic toxicity through prolonged skin exposure. Every stitch was a calculated attempt to cause maximum suffering without immediate death. Isaac wanted them to suffer as he had suffered, slowly and without hope of relief. But fate intervened before the governor's ball could take place. Margaret Whitmore's condition had deteriorated so severely that she could no longer leave her bed. Her skin had developed massive ulcerations that refused to heal, and she had begun experiencing severe neurological symptoms, seizures, hallucinations, and periods of complete paralysis. The Colonel was barely better, his breathing so labored that he required constant medical attention, while the children had developed fevers and skin conditions so severe that they looked like victims of some exotic plague. Dr. Thornfield, desperate to solve the medical mystery that was destroying one of the region's most prominent families, began to investigate every aspect of their daily lives. He examined their food, their water, their house, their habits, looking for any common factor that might explain their synchronized decline. It was during this investigation that he made a discovery that would change everything. He noticed that the family's symptoms seemed to correlate with their clothing. The breakthrough came when Dr. Thornfield observed that Margaret's sores followed the exact pattern of her corset stays, that the Colonel's rash matched the collar and cuff lines of his shirts, and that the children's symptoms appeared wherever their clothes fit most snugly. Had their clothes fit stays. Acting on this insight, he convinced the family to change into completely different garments, clothes that Isaac hadn't made. Within days, the family's condition began to stabilize. The progression of their symptoms slowed, and some of the less severe irritations actually began to heal. Dr. Thornfield's suspicion was confirmed. Something in their clothing was poisoning them. But who could have done such a thing? Who had access to their wardrobe? Who possessed the knowledge and skill to turn beautiful clothes into instruments of torture? Sure. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. When confronted with the evidence, Isaac initially maintained his innocence, playing the role of the shocked and loyal servant. But a search of his quarters revealed the hidden compartment with its arsenal of processed plant toxins, detailed notes about poison extraction techniques, and most damning of all, fabric samples that tested positive for the same compounds found in the family's clothing. Isaac's capture marked the end of one of the most sophisticated assassination attempts in American history, but it was far from the end of his story. When questioned about his motives, Isaac's carefully maintained facade of subservience finally cracked, revealing the brilliant, rage-filled mind that had orchestrated the family's torment. His confession was a masterpiece of controlled fury, detailing not just his methods, but his philosophy. "You want to know why?" he asked Dr. Thornfield during one interrogation. "Because they treated me like property while depending on my mind, my skills, my creativity to make them look like the civilized people they pretended to be. They dressed themselves in my artistry while denying my humanity. So I gave them exactly what they deserved, beautiful clothes that reflected their ugly souls." The trial of Isaac was a sensation throughout Mississippi and beyond. Here was an enslaved man who had nearly succeeded in murdering an entire white family, using nothing but his legitimate work, skills, and his knowledge of native plants. The prosecution painted him as a monster, a dangerous example of what happened when slaves were given too much education and freedom. But among the enslaved population, Isaac became something else entirely, a folk hero who had used his brain instead of his fists to strike back at his oppressors. The Whitmore family survived Isaac's poisoning, but they were never the same. Margaret remained partially paralyzed for the rest of her life. The Colonel developed chronic respiratory problems that plagued him until his death, and the children bore both physical and psychological scars from their ordeal. More importantly, the incident shattered their sense of security and superiority. They had been brought to their knees by a man they had considered property, Outsmarted by someone they had dismissed as inferior, Isaac was hanged on December 15th, 1844, but his execution only amplified his legend. The enslaved people of Mississippi whispered about the tailor who had turned thread into weapon, who had proven that intelligence could be more dangerous than violence, who had shown that even the most trusted slave might be planning the destruction of their masters. Saya. Plantation owners throughout the South began to view their skilled enslaved workers with new suspicion, wondering what other Isaacs might be hidden among their supposedly loyal servants. But here's what makes Isaac's story so profoundly disturbing and inspiring. He had turned the very symbol of his oppression into his weapon of choice. Every stitch he made was supposed to demonstrate his subservience, his skill and service to white supremacy. Instead, he transformed his enforced labor into an art form of resistance, creating beauty that concealed death, luxury that harbored revenge. The psychological impact of Isaac's near success extended far beyond the Whitmore plantation. Across the South, white families began to question the loyalty of their most trusted slaves, particularly those with specialized skills and access to intimate family spaces. The comfortable fiction that enslaved people were happy with their condition became much harder to maintain when confronted with evidence of such sophisticated, long-term planning for revenge. Isaac's method was particularly terrifying because it revealed how vulnerable slave owners actually were. They depended completely on enslaved labor for their comfort, security, and status, yet they had no way of truly knowing what their slaves were thinking or planning. The cook who prepared their food, the seamstress who made their clothes, the house servant who cleaned their rooms, any of them could be the next Isaac, weaving death into the fabric of daily life. What makes this story even more chilling is the realization that Isaac was probably not unique. His extensive knowledge of plant toxins, his sophisticated understanding of chemistry and biology, his ability to plan and execute such a complex operation, these skills didn't develop overnight. There were likely other enslaved people with similar knowledge and similar grievances, people who chose different methods or different targets, people whose stories were never discovered or never recorded. The legacy of Isaac the Poisoner forced a reckoning with the fundamental contradiction of slavery. How do you completely control people while completely depending on them? How do you maintain the fiction of racial superiority while relying on the intelligence and skills of people you claim are inferior? Isaac's near success proved that these contradictions made slavery inherently unstable and ultimately unsustainable. Today, nearly 180 years later, Isaac's story still resonates because it speaks to the power of expertise as resistance. In a world where enslaved people were denied education, denied recognition for their intelligence, denied credit for their innovations, Isaac used his legitimate skills to create illegitimate revenge. He turned his forced specialization into voluntary retaliation, his assigned role into his chosen weapon. Think about the psychological sophistication required for Isaac's plan. He had to maintain perfect emotional control for months while slowly poisoning the family he served. Yes, he had to continue creating beautiful, high-quality garments while incorporating deadly elements. He had to play the role of the concerned, loyal servant while watching his victims suffer from his own handiwork. This level of psychological compartmentalization reveals a mind of extraordinary complexity and determination. Isaac's story also illuminates the hidden resistance that existed throughout slavery. While history books focus on dramatic rebellions and escape attempts, Isaac represents the countless enslaved people who found subtler ways to strike back at their oppressors. His resistance was invisible, patient, and devastating, qualities that made it far more dangerous than open rebellion. The plants Isaac used to create his poisons were growing all around the plantation, free for anyone with the knowledge to harvest and process them. This reveals another layer of his genius. He used the very landscape of his imprisonment to create his weapons of liberation. The forest that hemmed in his world also provided him with the tools to transcend it, even if that transcendence came through revenge rather than escape. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of Isaac's story is what it reveals about human dignity and intelligence under oppression. The Whitmore family saw him as skilled property, valuable for his abilities, but fundamentally inferior in his humanity. Isaac proved them catastrophically wrong, demonstrating intellectual capabilities that far exceeded those of his supposed superiors. His near-successful murder plot was a dissertation written in poison, a masterpiece painted in suffering, a symphony composed of screams. The enslaved people who heard about Isaac's exploits understood something that their masters refused to acknowledge, that slavery didn't create inferior human beings. It created human beings forced to hide their capabilities. Isaac's story spread through slave quarters like wildfire because it proved that intelligence, creativity, and determination couldn't be enslaved, only disguised. When Isaac stood on the gallows in December 1844, he represented every enslaved person who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed as incapable of sophisticated thought. His execution was meant to serve as a warning, but it became a rallying cry. The message was clear. Never underestimate the person you forced to serve you. Never assume that submission equals stupidity. Never forget that intelligence can be the most dangerous form of resistance. So the next time someone suggests that enslaved people were passive victims who accepted their condition, remember Isaac the tailor. Remember the man who turned needle and thread into weapons of war, who transformed his oppressors' vanity into their vulnerability, who proved that the most devastating revolutions sometimes happen one stitch at a time. One stitch at a time. If this story has moved you, if it's opened your eyes to the buried truths of American resistance, then I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this is exactly the kind of story that mainstream history wants to forget. But here at Buried Truths, we're committed to digging up these stories and giving voice to those they tried to silence. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that intelligence has always been the ultimate form of resistance. Leave a comment telling me what other buried truths you want me to uncover. And remember, the stories they buried are the ones that matter most because they're the ones with the power to change how we see the world. Isaac's revenge lasted only months, but his legend echoes through history. History teaches us that expertise can be rebellion, that patience can be power, and that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one hiding in plain sight. The threads he wove carried more than poison. They carried proof that no human spirit can be permanently enslaved. Until next time, keep digging for the truth, because the stories they buried are the ones we need to remember. This is Buried Truths, where we uncover the past to understand the present. The voices they silenced will be heard, and the intelligence they denied will be acknowledged. Remember, Isaac. Remember the poison threads. Remember that revolution sometimes comes disguised as service, and that the most trusted hands might be weaving your destruction.